I woke up to the faint sound of breathing beside me, slow and steady, almost hypnotic. My eyes were still heavy, the room dim with the soft gray of early morning, but something felt different. My heart began to beat faster before I even knew why. I turned my head, and there she was, my sister, already moving, already doing something I couldn't quite understand at first. It wasn't the kind of thing you expect to see in that fragile space between sleep and waking, and it made my pulse pound in my ears. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. The air felt heavier, every second stretching into an eternity. She didn't notice me watching, or maybe she did, and that made it even harder to breathe. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, like the smallest sound might shatter the strange, delicate moment holding us in place. My thoughts tangled, half fear, half something else I didn't want to name. 1,000 questions flashed through my mind, but my lips stayed sealed. I just lay there, frozen, as the weight of what I was seeing settled in, knowing this morning had already changed something between us forever. The air between us felt almost alive, thick enough to taste, yet neither of us broke the silence. My body was awake now, but my mind was still chasing the edges of the dream I thought I'd been having before my eyes opened to this. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the sound of her quiet movements, and the steady rhythm of her breathing. Every tiny detail seemed louder than it should be, as if the morning was determined to make me notice everything. I didn't want to move too suddenly, didn't want her to realize I was awake yet, because I didn't even know what to say if she looked at me. My chest felt tight. This wasn't the kind of moment you could laugh off, wasn't something you could pretend didn't happen. My mind kept replaying the instant my eyes opened, the shape of her body, the way she was already so focused on what she was doing, like the world outside didn't exist. I wondered if she always did this when I wasn't watching, if I had been oblivious for so long. That thought sent a shiver up my spine, and I pulled the blanket closer without thinking. I told myself it was just to keep warm, but deep down I knew it was because I felt exposed, like she could somehow see into my head even without looking at me. The more I tried to slow my breathing, the more aware I became of the fact that every breath felt like it echoed. My heartbeat was doing its own thing now, pounding so hard it was almost dizzying. I thought about all the mornings before this one, the ordinary ones, when waking up was just waking up. Nothing special, no sharp edges, no blurred lines. This was different. This had a weight to it. A heaviness that pressed down on my chest and pulled my thoughts in dangerous directions. She shifted slightly, and the small movement made me flinch, though I stayed still on the outside. I caught a glimpse of her expression, and it wasn't casual, it wasn't careless. There was something in the way she held herself, like there was an unspoken reason behind every motion. I wanted to look away but couldn't. My gaze kept pulling back to her, even though I told myself to stop. The longer I stayed silent, the more the quiet seemed to grow. It wasn't an ordinary silence. It was charged, humming with something that made the hairs on my arms rise. I remembered the night before, sitting together on the couch, our knees brushing just slightly. It hadn't felt like an accident then either. Maybe this moment was the same, something deliberate that I didn't know how to name. My mind was already spinning, making connections I wasn't ready to admit. I could feel the tension stretching between us like an invisible string, tight and fragile, one wrong move away from snapping. And still, I stayed frozen, caught between wanting to interrupt and needing to see how this would unfold. I couldn't explain why I felt that way, but it was a pull I couldn't ignore. My lips parted slightly, as if my body was ready to speak before my brain could catch up, but the words never came. Instead, I just swallowed hard, tasting the morning air, my eyes fixed on her as if she held an answer I didn't even know I was searching for. The moment stretched on, and with every second that passed, I realized more clearly that nothing would go back to how it was before. It's strange how a single moment can crack open a door you never meant to walk through. Lying there in the stillness, my thoughts drifted backward without my permission, pulling me into the soft, hazy corners of memory. We had always been close, even as little kids, sharing secrets under blanket forts, whispering until our voices turned hoarse in the dark. Back then, it was innocent, pure, the kind of closeness that came from simply being each other's safest place. But somewhere along the way, the feeling shifted. I couldn't pinpoint when exactly it happened, but I remembered fragments, tiny, ordinary moments that had started to feel different. The way her hand would linger on my shoulder just a heartbeat too long, how our eyes would catch in the middle of a crowded room and neither of us would look away first, the way her laugh would slip under my skin and make my chest feel warm. They were all small things, easy to ignore when I wanted to convince myself they meant nothing. I used to think it was just my imagination, that my brain was turning familiar comfort into something it wasn't. But last night had been different. We'd been in the living room, just the two of us, some forgettable show playing in the background. She had curled up at the far end of the couch, then, without a word, stretched her legs so her feet rested against my thigh. It was such a simple thing, but I felt it like a spark, my skin suddenly too aware. I didn't say anything, didn't even move, but I could feel her watching me out of the corner of her eye. I laughed at something on the TV just to break the weight in the air, but it didn't really work. Later, when we both got up to head to bed, her fingers brushed mine in the hallway. Just a light touch, an accident by any reasonable standard. But I felt it echo in my chest long after she'd gone into her room. Now, in the quiet of this morning, those moments stacked together in my mind like a puzzle I didn't know I had been putting together all this time. Every memory felt sharper now, carrying a meaning I'd never let myself acknowledge before. A part of me wanted to bury it all, to pretend these feelings didn't exist, because admitting them felt dangerous, wrong even, but another part of me clung to the way they made me feel alive. I thought about the way she had looked at me a few weeks ago when I came home late, her hair messy, her hoodie slipping off one shoulder. She'd teased me about being out so long, but her eyes had been warm, searching, almost like she was waiting for something I wasn't giving her. I had laughed it off then, but that image had been living rent-free in my head ever since. My breathing slowed as I thought about all of it, the good and the confusing, the safe and the forbidden. I wasn't sure if I wanted to run from her or run to her. Every thought came with a burst of guilt, like I was betraying something sacred, yet the pull was too strong to ignore. She shifted again in the present moment, her back still partially turned to me, but I could feel her presence like heat in the room. My fingers curled into the blanket as if holding on to something tangible could keep me from unraveling. Maybe she didn't feel any of this. Maybe it was all just me, building stories in my head. That should have been a relief, but instead, it made my chest ache. Because if it was just me, then I was alone in it. And if it wasn't, well, then I had no idea where this road would lead, only that there would be no turning back once we stepped onto it. I shut my eyes for a second, wishing I could rewind time to when we were just sisters without this tangled undercurrent, but the truth was, I didn't want to lose what was growing in the shadows between us either. That was the most terrifying part. The rest of the morning unfolded with a strange, unspoken tension threading through every small movement. She eventually turned toward me, just for a moment, her expression unreadable, then looked away again as if nothing had happened. I sat up slowly, pretending to stretch, trying to make my body feel normal even though every muscle felt tight. My voice stayed trapped in my throat. We moved through the kitchen in silence, our footsteps soft against the floor, the clinking of dishes and the faint hum of the refrigerator filling in the spaces where words should have been. She poured coffee into 2 mugs without asking, sliding one toward me the way she always did, but even that felt different, like the air between us had shifted and we were both pretending not to notice. I caught myself glancing at her hands as she stirred her drink, the gentle circles she made with the spoon, the way her fingers curled around the handle. These weren't things I should be noticing, but I couldn't help it. Every tiny detail felt magnified, like I was looking at her through a lens that made everything more intimate than it was meant to be. I tried to focus on anything else, the sound of the rain starting outside, the faint scent of toast, but my mind kept wandering back to her. It was in the smallest things. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear. The way her hoodie hung loose over her frame. The way her lips parted slightly before she took a sip. None of it should have mattered, but each movement seemed to pull me in a little deeper. She caught me watching once, and my heart stumbled in my chest. She didn't say anything, but her mouth curved into a barely there smile before she looked back down at her cup. That smile stayed in my head far longer than it should have. I remembered other mornings, safe, quiet ones, where we would talk about nothing for hours. We used to laugh so easily, filling the space with a lightness that felt like home. But this was different. This felt heavier, like something had settled between us overnight that neither of us was ready to name. I thought about reaching across the table, maybe just brushing my fingers over hers, but the thought alone made my palms sweat. There was something intoxicating about the uncertainty, the not knowing what would happen if I crossed that line. She finished her coffee first, rinsed her mug, and leaned against the counter with her arms crossed. Her eyes flicked toward me, holding mine for a second longer than casual before she spoke, her voice low, almost teasing. "You're quiet this morning." I wanted to tell her why. I wanted to explain the knot in my chest, the way her presence seemed to fill every inch of space around me. But instead, I just shrugged, pretending I hadn't noticed the shift in her tone. "Didn't sleep much," I murmured, avoiding her gaze. She didn't push, but I could feel her watching me, studying me in the same way I had been studying her. It was a strange mirror, both of us looking, both pretending not to. The moment stretched until it was almost unbearable, then she turned away, breaking the connection, and I was left with the lingering echo of her eyes on mine. Even after she left the room, I stayed at the table, staring into my half-empty coffee cup, wondering how something so small could feel so monumental. I knew I was in trouble. Whatever this was between us, it wasn't fading, it was building. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more it demanded to be felt. That day stretched on endlessly, every hour feeling heavier than the last. I tried to throw myself into ordinary things, washing the dishes, folding laundry, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, but no matter what I did, my thoughts kept circling back to her. It was like an itch I couldn't reach, a quiet pulse under my skin that reminded me she was just a few steps away. I could hear her moving in the other room, opening drawers, the faint shuffle of her footsteps across the floor. Every sound seemed to pull at me, keeping my attention tethered to her even when I told myself to focus on something else. When I finally walked past the open doorway to her room, I caught sight of her sitting cross-legged on the bed, her hair falling in soft waves around her face, completely absorbed in something on her laptop. I should have kept walking. I should have acted like I hadn't seen her at all. But my feet slowed without my permission, my gaze lingering on her in that unguarded moment. She glanced up suddenly, and our eyes met. It wasn't a long look, maybe 2 seconds at most, but it felt like being caught in a current that I couldn't swim out of. There was something in her expression I couldn't name, something that made my chest feel too tight. I mumbled something about heading out to get some air, and she nodded, a faint smirk tugging at her lips, like she knew I was running from something. Outside, the cold air hit me hard, but it didn't clear my head. If anything, it made my thoughts sharper. I walked aimlessly, the crunch of gravel under my shoes filling the silence I had brought with me. I thought about the years we had spent growing up side by side, the way we used to protect each other without even thinking about it. Somewhere along the way, that bond had deepened into something else, something that scared me because it didn't fit into the neat boxes of right and wrong I had been taught. By the time I returned home, the sky was already turning a dull shade of orange, the kind of light that makes shadows stretch long across the floor. She was in the kitchen again, cutting vegetables for dinner, the knife moving in clean, confident motions. I hovered in the doorway, just watching for a moment, the smell of fresh garlic and onions filling the air. "You're staring," she said without looking up, her voice even but tinged with amusement. My cheeks burned instantly, and I turned away as if pretending to look for something on the counter. "Just spaced out," I said quietly, though the lie sat heavy in my mouth. She finally looked up, her eyes locking onto mine in a way that made the rest of the world fade out. There was no teasing now, just something direct, searching, like she was trying to read the thoughts I wasn't speaking. I felt a tremor run through me, a subtle but undeniable pull toward her, like the air between us was some invisible thread that would always draw me closer. I broke the stare first, grabbing a glass of water just to have something to do with my hands. The tension didn't dissolve, it only pressed in tighter, wrapping around me until I could feel it in my bones. She didn't say anything else, but the corners of her mouth curved slightly before she turned back to chopping, and I knew she had felt it too, that unspoken shift that neither of us dared name. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling for hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face in the kitchen, the way her eyes had held mine, steady and unflinching. I told myself to let it go, to think about anything else, but my mind refused. It replayed the moment over and over until the memory felt like a living thing, breathing in the dark alongside me. And somewhere deep down, I knew that whatever was happening between us wasn't going away. It was growing. Quietly, dangerously, it was growing. The next morning started with the same quiet weight hanging in the air, but there was something sharper about it now, like we had both crossed an invisible line without speaking a word. I woke up earlier than usual, the light outside still pale and cold, and for a while I just lay there listening to the faint movements in the house. She was already awake. I could hear her in the kitchen, the soft scrape of a chair against the floor, the rustle of a cereal box being opened. I stayed in bed longer than I needed to, not because I was tired, but because I didn't know what I would say when I saw her. The memory of the night before still clung to me, that long, unbroken look in the kitchen replaying in my mind until my chest felt tight again. Eventually, I got up, pulling on a sweater and moving quietly down the hall. When I reached the kitchen, she was sitting at the table, one knee tucked under her hair pulled up loosely with a few strands falling free. She didn't look surprised to see me. In fact, she didn't even glance up right away, just stirred her spoon slowly in her bowl like she knew I was there and wanted me to speak first. I poured myself some coffee, the sound of it hitting the mug louder than it should have been in the stillness. I took the seat across from her, my fingers curling around the warmth of the cup, searching for something to say. She looked up then, her eyes meeting mine without hesitation. "You were quiet again last night," she said softly, not accusing, just stating it like a fact. I tried to play it off with a half smile. Guess I had a lot on my mind. She didn't press, but she didn't look away either. It felt like we were both standing on the edge of something, and the smallest push would send us tumbling into it. I thought I saw something flicker in her expression, something unguarded, before she reached for the cereal box again. "Want some?" she asked casually, as if she hadn't just made my pulse spike with a glance. I shook my head, sipping my coffee instead, but the moment lingered, stretching between us like it had a weight of its own. After breakfast, we moved around the house in this strange rhythm, crossing paths in the hallway, brushing past each other in the living room. Each time we passed, there was the faintest shift in the air, a silent acknowledgement that neither of us dared put into words. That afternoon, I found her in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with an old photo album spread out in front of her. She was flipping through pictures of us as kids, her fingers tracing the edges of certain photos. I sat down beside her without thinking, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her. She smiled faintly when she saw me looking at a picture of us sitting on a swing together, our hands clasped even then. "We were inseparable," she murmured, her voice dipped in nostalgia. "Still are," I said quietly before I could stop myself. She turned her head, studying me for a moment, her eyes softer now. "Yeah," she said, almost a whisper. The room felt smaller then, like the walls had drawn closer, the air thickening around us. She reached for another picture, her hand brushing mine lightly in the process. It was such a small touch, but it sent a ripple through me, sharp and undeniable. I didn't move my hand away immediately. I let the moment linger, the quiet between us filled with 1,000 things neither of us was saying. She eventually looked back at the photo, but I could see the faintest trace of a smile tugging at her lips, the kind of smile that said she noticed. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized how dangerous this was becoming, not because of what might happen, but because of how much I wanted it to. And that truth settled into me like a slow, steady burn I couldn't put out. The air between us felt different after that afternoon, heavier yet more fragile, like the smallest wrong move could make everything collapse or explode. For the next couple of days, we seemed to orbit each other with an invisible thread pulling us closer, each passing moment blurring the line between what we were and what we were becoming. I noticed it in the way she lingered in a room just a little longer when I was there, how her eyes would sometimes meet mine and hold for a second too long before she'd look away, a faint smile ghosting across her lips as if she knew something I didn't. I found myself paying attention to every detail, her voice when she said my name, the subtle tilt of her head when she listened, the way she smelled faintly of something warm and familiar when she passed by me in the hallway. It was late one evening when the weight of it all seemed to press in harder than ever. The rain outside had been falling steadily since afternoon, tapping softly against the windows, and the glow from a single lamp in the living room painted everything in warm gold. She was curled up on the couch, a blanket draped over her legs, flipping through channels like she was looking for something but not really watching. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her. The sound of the rain and the flicker of the TV made the whole room feel like its own little world, shut off from everything else. She glanced up when she felt me there, her eyes catching mine, and she patted the spot next to her without saying a word. I crossed the room slowly, my pulse steady but heavy, and sank down beside her. The blanket shifted, brushing over my leg, and the warmth from her body seeped into mine instantly. She didn't move away. We sat there in silence, the kind that wasn't awkward but was so charged it made my breathing slow without me realizing it. Her knee rested lightly against mine under the blanket, and neither of us moved it. I could feel every inch of that point of contact, the heat of it, the subtle pulse of her presence. She turned her head slightly, her eyes searching mine in the soft light, and for a moment I thought she was going to say something. Instead, she reached for the remote, lowered the volume on the TV until it was barely more than a hum, and let it drop onto the couch between us. The quiet that followed was almost dizzying. I looked at her, and she was still looking at me, her lips parting slightly as if she was caught between a thought and the courage to speak it aloud. My heart thudded in my chest, and I didn't even try to hide the way I was staring back at her. I could see the way her breathing had changed too, slow and deep, her chest rising and falling with a rhythm that matched mine without meaning to. My fingers itched to close the space between us, to touch her just to see if she'd let me, but I stayed frozen, my thoughts a tangled mess of desire and fear. Her gaze softened, and for a second it felt like she was letting me see something raw, something unguarded that she didn't show anyone else. Then she shifted just slightly, her knee pressing a little harder into mine under the blanket, a silent gesture that sent a ripple through me so strong I almost forgot to breathe. I didn't know if it was a test, an invitation, or just my imagination turning nothing into everything. But I knew I didn't want to pull away. We stayed like that for what felt like an endless moment, staring at each other as the rain whispered against the glass, the glow of the lamp wrapping us in a cocoon of quiet, and I realized that whatever this was, it was no longer something I could pretend to ignore. It was here, alive between us, and neither of us was moving away. That night felt like it stretched forever, not because of the time on the clock but because of the space between every breath, every glance, every unspoken word. We stayed on that couch longer than I think either of us expected, the TV still playing faintly in the background but neither of us paying attention to it anymore. The blanket had shifted enough that a part of it now rested over both our legs, our knees still touching under its soft weight. My skin felt hyper-aware of every point where we connected, as if the simple press of her leg against mine could send messages straight to my heartbeat. Every time she moved even slightly, my body seemed to respond before my brain caught up. At one point, she leaned back into the cushions, her shoulder brushing mine, and I didn't move away. In fact, I leaned into it just enough to make it clear I wasn't pulling back. There was a stillness in her then, a way she stayed in that position like she was listening to something inside herself. I glanced at her face, at the way her lips parted slightly, her eyes cast down like she was thinking about something she couldn't quite put into words. I wanted to ask her what it was, but my own thoughts were too tangled to form a sentence. My heart was loud in my ears, and the air between us felt like it was thick with a truth we hadn't spoken yet. She finally turned her head toward me, and I swear the way her gaze met mine made the rest of the room disappear. There was something steady in her eyes, but also something uncertain, like she was standing in the same place I was, caught between wanting and fearing the same thing. My breath hitched, and I didn't try to hide it. She noticed. I could tell by the faint shift in her expression, the way her lips pressed together for just a moment before relaxing again. The space between us on that couch wasn't even enough to measure anymore, but it still felt like a chasm that would take courage to cross. I realized then that I was leaning closer without meaning to, like my body had made the choice before my mind could argue. She didn't move away. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, unblinking, and I could feel the faint warmth of her breath against my skin now. The rain outside had slowed to a gentle drizzle, a soft background noise that made everything else feel even quieter. My fingers twitched against the blanket, tempted to reach out, to take her hand or brush my knuckles against hers, but fear held me in place. Fear of what would happen if she pulled away. Fear of what would happen if she didn't. And then, so subtly I almost thought I imagined it, her knee pressed a little more firmly into mine, and her shoulder leaned just slightly harder against me. It was such a small thing, but it felt like the loudest confession in the world. I looked down at her hand resting so close to mine, and for a second, I let myself imagine closing the gap, feeling her fingers slide between mine, hearing whatever sound might escape her lips if I did. But instead, I stayed frozen, caught in the unbearable sweetness of the almost, the ache of being on the edge without stepping over. My pulse was unsteady, my mouth dry, and yet I didn't want the moment to end. The night had carried us somewhere we could never return from, even if neither of us had touched the other yet. That unspoken current between us was stronger than it had ever been, and by the time we both decided to head to bed, it felt like the walls of the house were holding a secret only we knew. I lay in my room, staring at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the faint sound of her moving around in the room next to mine. Every creak of the floorboard, every soft rustle made my body tighten, as if I was waiting for something I didn't dare name. I tried to force my mind to quiet down, but it was impossible. Every part of me was alert, my heart in my throat, my thoughts tangled between wanting her near and fearing what would happen if she was. I don't know how much time passed before I heard it, the softest knock on my door. I froze, breath catching, my eyes darting toward the shadows. The knock came again, even lighter this time, almost as if she didn't want to be heard by anyone else. I pushed myself up, the blanket slipping from my shoulders, and padded to the door. When I opened it, she was standing there in the dim hallway light, her hair falling loose around her face, her eyes searching mine in a way that made my pulse race. "Can't sleep," she whispered, her voice low, almost apologetic. I stepped aside without thinking, and she walked in, her bare feet silent against the floor. She sat on the edge of my bed, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt heavy, but not in a way that made me want to escape. It was the kind of weight that pressed you closer together. I sat beside her, close enough to feel the heat radiating off her skin, and she turned slightly toward me. "This is different lately," she said softly, and my stomach twisted at the truth of it. I wanted to tell her I'd been feeling it too, that it had been consuming me, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, and the smallest smile tugged at her lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together, then back up at me, and that's when it happened. She reached out and let her fingertips brush against mine. It was such a small touch, almost nothing, but it burned straight through me. I didn't move away. I didn't even breathe for a moment. My fingers curled just slightly, and she noticed, her hand stilled, but she didn't pull back. We stayed like that, skin barely touching, eyes locked, breathing the same slow air. The seconds felt like they stretched on forever, my chest tightening with the knowledge that we were standing right at the edge. I could see it in her expression too, that she was waiting to see if I would take that last step, or if she should. And then, in the smallest, most deliberate movement, she turned her hand over, her palm opening to mine. My breath caught as our fingers slid together, the warmth of her hand folding into mine like it had been meant to fit there all along. Neither of us spoke. The world outside the room disappeared, leaving only the quiet sound of our breathing and the pounding of my heart in my ears. I didn't know what would come after this, if the world would crash down around us or if this moment would change everything for the better, but I knew there was no going back. We stayed like that for a long time, holding on as if the contact itself was an answer to every question we'd been too afraid to ask. And somewhere in that silence, I realized that this wasn't just a fleeting spark, it was a fire we had both been feeding without realizing it. And now, it was burning quietly, steadily, unstoppable. If this story kept you hooked till the very end, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep, emotional, and unforgettable love stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment hit you the hardest? Your support means the world, and it helps me bring more stories like this straight to you. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter of love, longing, and everything in between.